Good afternoon, everyone. I asked Ron last week if he minded me preaching on alcohol. I think he was relieved when he found out I wasn't against it. So, alcohol is good or bad in and of itself. It's neither good nor bad either in and of itself. It's just according to how it's used. And I want to talk about pro and con, good and bad, on 4 levels today: medically, socially, mentally, and spiritually. And I'll just start out with medically. It's good. Okay. Let's go to Luke, the 10th chapter. And in Luke 10, we'll start reading with verse 30. And it says, "Then Jesus answered and said, A certain man went down from Jerusalem to Jericho and fell among thieves, who stripped him of his clothing, wounded him, and departed, leaving him half dead. Now by chance a certain priest came down that road, and when he saw him, he passed by on the other side. Likewise a Levite, when he arrived at the place, came and looked and passed by on the other side. But a certain Samaritan, as he journeyed, came where he was, and when he saw him, he had compassion. So he went to him, bandaged his wounds, pouring on oil and wine. And he set him on his own animal, brought him to an inn, and took care of him. On the next day, when he departed, he took out 2 denarii, gave them to the innkeeper, and said to him, Take care of him, and whatever more you spend, when I come again, I will repay you. So which of these 3 do you think was neighbor to him who fell among the thieves?" So the emphasis is mine on this story. We go to verse 34, and it says he poured oil and wine on the man's wound. The oil, probably expensive, probably olive oil, and the wine was probably not cheap either. And the oil would keep the skin supple. The wine would have been an antiseptic, not an anesthetic. He probably still felt it. Okay. On his wounds, and it would prevent infections and cure any infection that was in there. Now, wine has the following properties when it comes to killing germs. It's been known to kill germs like E. coli, which can be deadly. It can kill salmonella, and it can kill other such germs. Okay, so wine is one of those things that in and of itself is a good antiseptic. Wine is much milder than some of the antiseptics we have now and some of the alcohols that we have. Also, drinking red wine is thought to help those with high cholesterol and is thought to be good for the heart. It can also lower blood sugars. It's thought that red wine may even now be good for the teeth because it can remove plaque. So when I drink it, I make sure I swirl it around a little more. Okay. And may be a preventative for even some cancers. They're still doing research on the goodness of wines. Red dry wines, and dry when you're talking about wine, or any liquor, it means not sweet. So if I use the word dry, it just means it's not sweet. And red wine has a substance in it, although not a whole lot. It's called resveratrol. And you can actually buy resveratrol. It's on the bottom shelf at Walmart. It costs $10 for 60 tablets, and it's mixed with vitamin D3. So if you can't drink wine, if you're taking a medicine or something where you can't drink red wine, or you're an alcoholic, or you have a problem with alcohol, you can still get the goodness of it by taking resveratrol. And I have one lady that I work with, and she says resveratrol actually makes her look younger. I was surprised at how old she was, but her skin looks very good, and she says she takes resveratrol. If we look at the flavors of wine, and I'm going to speak mostly about wines in this sermon, the first thing we may look at, of course, is dry or not sweet, and then modern wines in certain areas of the world are known for that area. For instance, Champagne is made in Champagne, France. So if you have a Champagne, which is really a Champagne in California, you can't call it a Champagne. You have to call it a sparkling wine, okay? So if you know the growing season and all of this of different grapes, then you know how good a wine is. And by the way, some of the finest wines in the world come out of Texas because we have such a long growing season. France has good wines, but we have even better wines in some cases. There are many alcoholic beverages. I don't know if I've tried them all or not, but I've certainly tried, especially when I was in college. Liquor is higher alcohol content. It's made by a distillation process, and probably back in the days of Christ and the Old Testament, there was no hard liquor. There was something they made from dates and other things that had a higher alcoholic content than wine and beer. And the Babylonians primarily made beer, and the Hebrews primarily made wine. Many times a region or a country is known for its primary alcohol, such as Germany makes beers. I've been to Germany and I've drank some of their beers. They're a higher alcohol content than our beers here. You don't know that until you drank one, and then you're still sitting there wondering what happened. And they bring you a stein about this big and about this big around. Germany's also known for its ice wines, though. And ice wines are very, very sweet wines. The grapes will get pores in them, and they almost like raisins. And if you buy a bottle of ice wine, it's usually about very, very small. It can be a third of a fifth, and you'll pay extreme amount for it. And it's very, very sweet. It's a dessert wine. Europe is known mostly for its wines. Japan is known for its rice wine called sake, and in Korea they have something called soju, and it's like sake. And if you drink soju, we had a little T-shirt that had "Build a Cat" on it, and if you remember the Bloom County things, cartoons and newspaper, Build a Cat was all frizzed up, and he looked like he was just out of his mind totally. And underneath it said the soju experience. And we, working there medically, you could see a lot of people who had the soju experience. They also sold this OB beer that was about $1 for a quart. And I drank enough OB beer. I'll probably not need any embalming when I die, because they said it had a certain amount of what they used to embalm, formaldehyde in it. And Russian, of course, is vodka, and they make that from potatoes. Distilled liquors, of course, are higher than wine and beer, and the word proof is used a lot. I just wanted to give you a little background here. If you hear the word proof, just multiply the percentage times 2. So 25% alcohol is 50 proof. 100% alcohol is 200 proof. Okay. Liquors like brandies and cognacs are closely related to wines, and they usually are distilled from like fruit juice or fruit pulp. They're very sweet. They can even be distilled from like grape skins, that sort of thing. Whiskeys, like Scotch whiskey, sour mash, made in Tennessee. Scotch whiskey is made in Scotland. Bourbon is a whiskey that can only come out of Bourbon County, Kentucky. That's the reason why it's called a bourbon. So if you're in Tennessee, even though it tastes like a bourbon, looks like a bourbon, basically is a bourbon, you can't call it that. You have to call it sour mash or something else, because it didn't come from Bourbon County. And usually that's made from like fermented corn, rice, or other grains. When the alcohol is first distilled, it's just simply ethyl alcohol and water. And then they put it in these oak barrels, and it gets the color and the different tannins and flavors, mainly from the oak, and it stays in there for a period of years. And some of your higher priced Scotch whiskeys may be in there for like 18 years. Okay. Now medically, going back to medically, when I was young, I remember my sister getting the croup, and my sister would cough so much that my father took her to the doctor, and it's almost like she would lose her breath. She would just keep coughing and coughing and coughing. And the old country doctor that we had, I'll never forget him, he said, put candy and sugar in whiskey. So my father had to go out, because it was dry county, to this place that was down in this little part of town that looked like a shack, and you would go in back and could buy you a bottle of whiskey. And he went there and he bought a bottle of whiskey and got some horehound sticks. I don't know if you remember those. They taste kind of cinnamon, and put those in it, and then put sugar in it, put a little water in it, and then gave her a teaspoon of whiskey when she would get it, and you didn't have to give her but about 2 or 3 little teaspoons, and then she would quit coughing and she would sleep all night long. Now, I'm not recommending this, okay, so don't be giving your child whiskey, because unless the doctor says so, because you never know what alcohol will react with now, and people take a lot of different drugs and things like that, and all of that kind of thing. But for a long time, NyQuil, I believe, was about 25% alcohol, which is about 50 proof. You know, they stopped that now. But it worked quite well. It actually worked quite well. Now, wine that has been naturally fermented is about 10 to 14% alcohol. So it's about 20 to 28 proof. If wine is more than 14% alcohol, it's called a fortified wine. Okay. Alcohol is known as a sterilizing agent that I brought up, and killing basically all germs in the past. I don't know what kind of super germs we got now, but I remember when I first went into nursing, when Moses was still alive, according to some people. I crossed over 31 years in nursing this year, but we still, when I first went into nursing, we still put instruments in 70% alcohol, which was 70% alcohol, 30% water. And it seems that 100% alcohol really won't kill germs that effectively. But 70% alcohol mixed with 30% water, you would place stuff in there, and it took about 20 minutes for it to kill them. But it would kill bacteria because the tension between the water and alcohol literally tore the germs apart. Okay? Alcohol foam was used for many years to clean hands, and is still in a lot of hand sanitizers. But unfortunately, as I said, in this age of super germs, it takes really hard cleaners sometimes to kill many bacteria in disaffected areas. As an anesthesia, I've never researched this. I don't think it was very effective, but you'll see the old Civil War movie where they are about to cut off his leg, and they give him a big slug of whiskey, and it probably didn't do anything, but it might have helped him calm down a little bit, but it was going to hurt, anyway. Let's turn to 1 Timothy 5:23. And it just simply says in 1 Timothy 5:23, no longer, and Paul is telling Timothy this, he says, no longer drink only water, but use a little wine for your stomach's sake and for your frequent infirmities. So there may be some properties of wine that we don't really know about that much, but I'm sure Paul wouldn't have told him that if it wasn't effective some way. So we may have some properties of wellness in wines that we don't even know yet. Now, of course, if we can talk about good medically, we can talk about bad medically. Let's turn to Proverbs, the 23rd chapter. We'll read verses 29 through 35. In Proverbs 23, it says, who has woe? Who has sorrow? Who has contentions? Who has complaints? Who has wounds without cause? Who has redness of eyes? Those who linger long at the wine, those who go in search of mixed wine. Do not look on the wine when it is red, when it sparkles in the cup and it swirls around smoothly. At the last it bites like a serpent and stings like a viper. Your eyes will see strange things, and your heart will utter perverse things. Yes, you will be like one who lies down in the midst of the sea, or like one who lies at the top of the mast, saying, They have struck me, but I was not hurt. They have beaten me, but I did not feel it. When shall I awake, and that I may seek another drink? And is there a better picture of the binge drinker or of the alcoholic? Now, medically, the abuse of alcohol can cause many problems. Okay, alcohol can cause severe intoxication when taken improperly and in too much, and it's caused wrecks on the highways and deadly and debilitating accidents from people doing potentially dangerous things like hunting and fishing. I've hunted for many, many years, but I don't drink when I hunt. I fish, and I don't drink when I fish. We probably have all been touched by one way or another by accidents caused from alcohol abuse. There'll probably be drownings this year in this area because people mixed a boat with alcohol, and it doesn't mix. So cars, boats, guns, other potentially dangerous activities, they don't mix with alcohol. And last night I was working on this, and when I got through, I just walked in, turned on the TV, and one of the comedians was on, and they were talking. He was talking about paying extra for certain luggage and things, and he said, "Well, I would pay $30 extra for a ticket if you guarantee the pilot is sober, you know, when he goes to fly." Alcohol, if taken too much or too long, can cause liver damage and cause something called cirrhosis of the liver, which means the liver is too hard to function. When we lose about 75% of the function of our livers, then we die. The liver detoxifies alcohol at a very slow speed. When the liver has been overwhelmed and damaged by alcohol over time, it first swells and then enlarges, and then it eventually shrinks and becomes hard. And cirrhosis just simply means hardening of the liver. And because it's hard, the blood vessels that go from the liver to the other organs become swollen. And when veins become swollen, they're called varicose veins. You know, my father didn't have to serve in the Army because he had swollen veins in his legs. He had varicose veins in his legs, great big veins. When these swollen legs or swollen veins are varicose and all that, and they're huge, and when they are around the esophagus, or the tube that carries the food from the mouth to the stomach, then they have a tendency to break and to bleed, and it's a pretty horrible sight. A person can lose all of their blood through their mouth within a matter of seconds. And when I first started working in intensive care units, we would get people in with end-stage alcohol disease, and we would have to put what's called a Blakemore tube down their throat and blow up this balloon in their stomach and pull it tight against it, and then we would put a football helmet on them and tie this, coming through their mouth, tie this to the face guard on the football helmet. And then through a part of the tube that was designed for that, we would push cold water to keep these veins from busting and bleeding out. It was temporary temporary fix to a permanent problem, and ice lavage really didn't prevent that much. It's a fatal situation. The only thing that would cure that or give the person life is a liver transplant when it gets to that point. So that's just one of the problems that comes out of end-stage alcohol disease, or problem drinking too much alcohol over the years. But I saw it in people in their late 30s and early 40s, and the abdomen becomes very, very tight. It's like thumping a really tight watermelon, and of course they can't eat very well. Eventually they become jaundiced. They have this greenish yellow color all over them, and even their eyes become that, and they're usually not far from death. Alcohol poisoning is a more acute problem, and it can come when people just keep drinking and drinking. Now, alcohol poisoning is many times fatal, and I've actually seen people young people die from alcohol poisoning. Usually they die from respiratory and cardiac arrest. And often when this happens, pure grain alcohol is part of the culprit. Pure grain alcohol is about 100% alcohol. They call it PGA. Some people call it Everclear. The body does not know how to reject it, and therefore you get so much that you become poisoned. I was talking to an internal medicine doctor, and he told me that the poisons in alcohol actually save your life. There's like tannins in whiskey, and if you keep drinking whiskey, eventually you're going to start throwing up because of the poisons from the tannins. Red wine has a certain poison in it that if you get too much, you're going to throw up, okay? But because PGA, pure grain alcohol, is just going to keep keep absorbing into your system, and you're not going to throw up, a lot of times it kills you from alcohol overdose. Now, there are many types of alcohols. There's methyl alcohol, which is wood alcohol. There's other types of alcohols, but what we're talking about is ethyl alcohol, or that which caused by the fermentation of organic things like fruits and vegetables, grapes, that sort of thing. Now, if alcohol is on board during modern day anesthesia, you may die, because some of the things they use can put you into cardiac arrest or heart arrest. That's another reason why not to drink and drive, because if you have a wreck, the surgery for the trauma, the anesthesia may kill you from just that, if you have too much alcohol on board. And there are probably many other problems caused physically by drinking too much alcohol. Okay. Socially, alcohol can be good or bad, just as medically. Financially, it's a part of our society, and many jobs depend on making and marketing alcohol products. You can travel to Tennessee, and I forget the name of the small town, Lynchburg, I think, where they make Jack Daniels, and it's a big industry there, and they make a lot of money. People who cut the wood for the barrels, probably, it's a big industry just for that. People who take the barrels and cut them in half and bring them to Lowe's so you can buy them and plant flowers in them, that's probably a big industry too. So there's many things about that that is dependent upon a lot of the alcohol, and sometimes they take the older barrels, as I understand, and send them to Scotland to make Scotch in. Social drinking. Different wines can add many good flavors to a meal, during, before, after a meal, certain alcoholic beverages. And of course, it can be used in celebrations like weddings. Let's turn to John, the 2nd chapter. So John, the 2nd chapter, we'll just read verses 1 through 10. On the 3rd day there was a wedding in Cana of Galilee, and the mother of Jesus was there. Now both Jesus and his disciples were invited to the wedding. And when they had ran out of wine, the mother of Jesus said to him, "They have no wine." Jesus said to her, "Woman, what does your concern have to do with me? My hour has not yet come." His mother said to the servants, "Whatever he says to you, do it." Now there were set 3 water pots of stone. Now these water pots of stone probably held between 20 and 30 gallons. So he didn't make a little wine, okay? He made a lot of wine, according to the matter of purification of the Jews, containing 20 or 30 gallons apiece. Jesus said to them, "Fill the water pots with water," and they filled them up to the brim. And he said to them, "Draw some out now, and take it to the master of the feast." And they took it. When the master of the feast had tasted the water that was made wine, and did not know where it had come from, but the servants who had drawn the water knew, the master of the feast called the bridegroom. And he said to him, "Every man at the beginning sets out the good wine, and when the guests have well drunk, then the inferior. You have kept the good wine until now." So that wine, I would have loved to have tasted it, but it was probably just the most excellent wine that you could ever drink. Now, 20 to 30 gallons is between, 120 and 180 gallons of water, of wine. That's a lot of wine. That must have been a very big wedding, too. So, to say that Christ didn't promote drinking of wine, he did. He made it for the wedding, and that was his first miracle. Now, I like wine, and I like wine so well I made a poem about it and put it in my book, okay? So I'm going to read to you my poem. It's called Appreciation. And I wrote, for those of us who love fine wines, we all have a hidden keeper that is kept in a special place for a special person and time. I don't know that I have a hidden keeper right now, but my wife and I do splurge one time a year and buy a bottle of Dom Perignon. We didn't do it last year because of health concerns and things, but a bottle of Dom Perignon, when we bought our first one, it was $84. The last one cost about $225, I think. And we never drink more than half the bottle, so we pour out like $110 worth of wine the next day. But we're not going to invite anybody either, so. But this is about wine. Life's flowers lie within you, with a hint of raspberry, oak, and pepper so layered in your deep-aged reds. Violets bloom within your bouquet, and your subtleties reach out to me from your breathing. Crystal is appropriate. You are the hidden keeper, the special bottle in the special place in my private room. Cost bears no significance, but you are a find. I sit with the right person at the right time to share you. This love is not leaving, nor is your memory. So if I tried to get up here and tell you I don't drink wine, then you would know I was a liar if you ever read my poem about wine. And also, I like cognac. It's usually drier than other brandies, and I'm not a real sweet liquor or alcohol drinker, so I like to sit down on the couch on a winter's day and slowly drink a few ounces of cognac, about 2 or maybe no more than 3 ounces, sometimes maybe even 1 ounce. I put it in a sniffer, you know, that big glass, and I'll swirl it. It drives my wife crazy. She says, you'll pick it up, you'll smell it, you'll set it back down, you'll pick it up, you'll take one little drink, you'll set it back. Why don't you just drink it? And I'm like, that's not what you do, you know, you enjoy it. So I wrote a poem about cognac too. Let me read you that. It's very short. It says, cognac warms me and settles upon my tongue. Its sharpness enthralls me, its vapors consume me. Another taste brings back a memory. Small amounts can last for hours. Life slows. So, yes, I do like a good cognac, but 2 ounces of cognac will last me 4 hours, and my wife is like, why do you sit there and do that? But it's just because it's good, you know. But I also wrote a poem about ripe figs, and I love ripe figs off of my little fig tree when the dew's still on it and everything. And if you ask me which one I like better than cognac or wine itself, I like the ripe figs. And that's probably because all of the birds and raccoons and opossums and deer get to them before I do, and if I get 1 fig a year, I'm doing pretty well. So, wine and other good liquors and even some good beers can add much to a meal, can add much to a visit with friends or family. But there's a bad side socially to wine. Let's turn to 1 Corinthians chapter 8. And Paul here is talking about meat that's offered to idols. And these people probably didn't have very much meat, and if it's been offered to an idol, he would eat it. But he said, if it offends my brother, I won't do it. So I thought it's pretty good to talk about alcohol too. But beware lest again with verse 9, but beware lest someone, this liberty of yours, become a stumbling block to those who are weak. For if anyone sees you who have knowledge eating in an idol's temple, will not the conscience of him who is weak be emboldened to eat those things offered to idols? And because of your knowledge shall the weak brother perish, for whom Christ died. And when you thus sin against the brethren and wound their weak conscience, you sin against Christ. Therefore, if food makes my brother stumble, I will never again eat meat, lest I make my brother stumble. And some people may have a slight kind of an allergy to alcohol. I've known people like this who get very angry no matter how much little they drink, and become have a big problem with it. Some people have a tendency to binge drink. Some people can't take it in moderation. Some people are alcoholics that are recovering. And if anyone like that is in my home, the alcohol is going to stay in the cabinet. I'm not going to bring it out and drink it in front of them. And I think that's just the way it should be. There's financial problems that are national and even worldwide in nature because of alcohol. The cost of treating and hospitalizing people harmed from alcohol is devastating, from everything from wrecks to the people suffering from end-stage alcohol disease. It can tear apart families. And let's turn to Genesis, the 9th chapter. Genesis 9, and we'll read verses 20 through 27. Now Noah, this is after the flood, and he planted a vineyard. Then he drank of the wine and was drunk, and became uncovered in his tent. And Ham, the father of Canaan, saw the nakedness of his father, and told his two brothers outside. But Shem and Japheth took a garment, laid it on both their shoulders, and went backward and covered the nakedness of their father. Their faces were turned away, and they did not see their father's nakedness. So Noah woke from his wine, and knew what his younger son had done to him. Then he said, Cursed be Canaan, a servant of servants, he shall be to his brother. And he said, Blessed be the Lord, the God of Shem, and may Canaan be his servant. May God enlarge Japheth, and may he dwell in the tents of Shem, and may Canaan be his servant. And Noah lived after the flood 350 years, so all the days of Noah were 950 years, and he died. So we see here that we have a family problem. Ham was cursed, seeing his father naked, and disrespected his father, Noah, in that process. Let's turn to Genesis, the 19th chapter. We can begin reading with verse 30, where it says, Then Lot went up out of Zoar. This is after he had been taken out of Sodom. It says, Then Lot went out of Zoar and dwelt in the mountains, and his two daughters were with him. Of course, his wife was dead, for he was afraid to dwell in Zoar, and he and his two daughters dwelt in a cave. Now the firstborn said to the younger, Our father is old, and there is no man on the earth to come to us, as is the custom of all the earths. Come, let us make our father drink wine, and we will lie with him, that we may preserve the lineage of our fathers. So they made their father drink wine that night, and the firstborn went in and lay with her father, and he did not know when she lay down or when she arose. It happened on the next day that the firstborn said to the younger, Indeed, I lay with my father last night. Let us make him drink wine tonight also, and you go in and lie with him, that we may preserve the lineage of our father. Then they made their father drink wine that night also, and the younger arose and lay with him, and he did not know when she lay down or when she arose. Thus both the daughters of Lot were with child by their father. The firstborn bore a son and called his name Moab. He is the father of the Moabites to this day, and the younger she also bore a son and called his name Ben-Ammi. He is the father of the people of Ammon to this day. And if you read, this was incest, of course. This didn't stop here. I mean, you can read about the Moabites and how they got in trouble with God, and the Ammonites, how they got in trouble with God. And it was from incestual relationship that all of this came about. So it's another lesson on the dangers of drunkenness and how it can affect family dynamics, and this continued generation after generation. I will say this about Lot, though. At least his daughters had to get him drunk before they could do this. So I don't know how good that is. He shouldn't have gotten drunk anyway. And by the way, drunkenness in a lot of societies that serve alcohol, like the Jewish society, they drink a lot of alcohol. Drunkenness is not an acceptable thing. So let's turn to 1 Samuel, and we'll start with verse 25. Chapter 25. Chapter 25, and we'll begin reading with verse 36. And David is hiding from Saul here. And it says, now Abigail went to Nabal, and there he was holding a feast in his house like the feast of a king, and Nabal's heart was merry within him, and he was very drunk. Therefore she told him nothing, little or much, until morning light. So it was in the morning, when the wine had gone from Nabal, and his wife had told him these things, that his heart died within him, and he became like a stone. Then it happened after about 10 days that the Lord struck Nabal, and he died. Now Nabal would not help David and his men with giving them food and goods, and Nabal died basically after drinking to excess, I would imagine. Abigail would go on to become one of David's wives. College. Oh my goodness. I shouldn't remember that much about it, but I remember I was going to college with a family member. I'm not going to say any more than that. And he walked by a display, and it was back in the 70s, and I think beer had gone from like $1.50 a six-pack to $1.85 a six-pack, and he said the cost of living just went up 35 cents. I'll never forget that. But college students do a lot of alcohol abuse at like their hazings and parties, and this can lead to very deadly consequences. Families are often torn apart by parents who abuse alcohol. Even children can abuse alcohol. I've heard of children alcoholics now. Alcoholics Anonymous is for alcoholics, and Al-Anon is for the family members of alcoholics, and a lot of times the family members feel guilt or anger at their family member as an alcoholic. A lot of times they blame themselves for the behavior. Many adults use alcohol to excess and become homeless or penniless, and the unclean living a lot of times can lead to diseases like hepatitis A, which is caused by garbage. And alcohol can make you homeless. Drunk drivers have killed many people over the years, and Mothers Against Drunk Driving, or MADD, M-A-D-D, was made because I guess the mothers got tired of losing their children and their husbands to drunk drivers. Now, I remember one of the ads said, sure, he's sick, but let's get him off the road. Well, there are female drunk drivers too, but mentally, of course, mentally it's both good and bad. Let's turn to Psalms, 104th chapter. Psalms 104, and we'll just read verses 14 and 15. He causes the grass to grow for the cattle, and vegetation for the service of man, that he may bring forth good food from the earth, and wine that makes glad the heart of men, oil to make his face shine, and bread which strengthens man's heart. Notice that wine can make man glad. This is not speaking about alcohol abuse. You know, Christ drank wine, and he did not abuse alcohol. Alcohol is relaxing. It has many different tastes that I talked about in my poem. It can be a delight, but if alcohol is used for emotionally coping, it becomes dangerous. If it's used for other purposes, it can become dangerous. And alcohol, as far as the bad mental side, alcohol is related to many mental disorders. People often drink to escape or cope. If you find yourself doing that, if I find myself doing that, then I need to probably get away from it. Okay. Of course, alcohol dulls the senses, dulls the minds. Alcohol Alert number 23, October 2004 says, alcohol can cause difficulty walking, blurred vision, slurred speech, slowed reaction times, impaired memory. It affects the brain. Some of these impairments are detectable only after one or two drinks and quickly resolve when drinking stops. On the other hand, a person who drinks heavily over a long period of time may have brain deficits that persist well after he or she achieves sobriety. Exactly how alcohol affects the brain and the likelihood of reversing the impact of heavy drinking on the brain remain hot topics in alcohol research today. We do know that heavy drinking may have extensive and far-reaching effects on the brain, ranging from simple slips in memory to permanent and debilitating conditions that require lifetime custodial care. And even moderate drinking leads to short-time impairment, as shown by extensive research on the impact of drinking and driving. So it can cause many problems with the brain. I don't believe it causes that many problems with the brain if taken as it should be taken. I believe it's a blessing from God. That is my belief. But it can even go to the point of blackouts and memory loss. Therefore, should we drink alcohol? Well, I was riding to work with a man one time, and really liked the man. He was a big, tall fellow and was in the military. And I said, you know, I don't want to go home just yet. I said, why don't we just stop and have a beer? And I said, I'll buy. And he said, we'll stop and I'll have a Coke and you can have a beer. And I said, oh, I didn't know. I said, I honestly didn't know. But I said, beer's not important. So we went to, I think it was Burger King. And we had a burger and a Coke, and we were just as happy as we could be. Okay. When I went to nursing school, I had a problem with alcohol, and what I did was, it wasn't that much of a problem, I didn't think, but I wanted to find out what was wrong with me. So I went to an AA meeting, Alcoholics Anonymous meeting, and I got the head person, the one that was doing all the talking and the master of ceremonies, I got him over in a corner and I told him my story with alcohol. And I said, am I an alcoholic? And he says, no, you're a binge drinker. He said, quit binging and you'll be okay. So what I did was, actually he said, quit binging and you'll be all right. I still remember his face. I don't know who he is or can remember his name if I had to. I was younger then, he was older, so he may not even be alive now, but I owe a lot to that man. But we talked about it, and he basically told me quit binging. Just quit binging. So I was walking by a bar one day, and I pretty much had just quit drinking, and I thought, I'm going to walk in that bar, I'm going to sit down, and I'm going to have one beer. And if I can have one beer and then turn around and walk out, and I was walking home, I said, then I'll probably know if I can just sit down and have one beer or not, you know, and not binge. So I was very afraid of alcohol. So I went in, I sat down, and I had one beer, and I got up and left. And it hit me after I got about 10 feet away from the door. That's the first beer you ever enjoyed in your life. And it's been that way from now on. I can drink a little bit of wine, I can drink a beer, and I really like the smaller beers because it's hard for me to make it through a whole beer sometimes. And they used to serve these little ponies and little 7-ounce beers. I really like those. But you know, I found out that I was a binge drinker, and the cure was quit binging. So I quit binging, and it worked fine for me. Now, drinking is a gift from God that can become a curse very quickly. And often social drinking in families where the person sees a responsible adult, that person usually never becomes an alcoholic, and they never binge drink, and they never abuse alcohol. If a child can see a responsible adult drinking responsibly, it just becomes something more or less like a food, and that's about the way I think of it. Okay? And I don't need it if it's going to bother somebody. And I actually have people who come over to the house sometimes who have problems with alcohol, and I'm not going to drink in front of them. Okay? So, alcohol responsibility. I found an old article while I was researching this, and I just want to read a little bit from it. And it's from Responsibility in Alcohol, Teaching Responsible Decisions. And it's from the 70s. It says, research has revealed how low incidence of alcoholism or alcohol abuse among cultural groups who use alcohol as part of their daily lives. And my wife told me one day, she said, I've seen you drink ever since we've been married, but I've never seen you drunk. Now I said, thank you, that's quite a compliment. So as a rule, and Jewish people drink a lot of alcohol, but you don't see them drunk. And you don't see, I've never heard of an alcoholic Jew. There may be, but I've never heard of one. Okay. As a rule, these groups have developed attitudes and habits to foster responsible drinking within their culture. Some of these attitudes follow. Children are exposed to alcohol early in life within an established family or a religious context. Whatever the beverage, it is served diluted in small quantities with consequent low blood alcohol levels. The beverages used are commonly those containing large amounts of non-alcoholic components such as wines or beers, which help to retain low alcohol levels. The beverage is considered mainly as a food and is usually consumed with meals. Parents present a constant example of moderate drinking. No moral importance is attached to drinking. It is considered neither a virtue nor a sin. Drinking is not viewed as proof of adulthood or virility. Abstinence is socially acceptable. It is no more rude or ungracious to decline a drink than to decline a piece of cake. Excessive drinking or intoxication is not socially acceptable and is not considered a stylish, comic, or even tolerable. Alcohol is not a prime focus of any activity. Finally, and perhaps most importantly, there is wide and unusually complete agreement among members of the group in the ground rules of drinking. And in this article is a very good article. It says, during the 1970s, the philosophy of responsible use of alcohol evolved from many sources. It was first, well, it just tells the different people who came up with ideas about alcohol, but I want to read some of these ideas. Alcohol is a drug that can cause positive and negative social, psychological, and physical effects. The responsible use of alcohol can be socially, psychologically, and physically beneficial. To drink or not to drink should be a personal decision. However, those who choose to drink have a responsibility not to damage themselves or society. People who drink need to respect the decision of those who wish to not drink. People who serve alcoholic beverages need to contribute to a healthy drinking environment and not push drinks on others. Intoxication is not responsible drinking. There's a direct link between responsible attitudes toward drinking and the alleviation of the problem of alcohol. And it goes on and explains several things. I really like the article. But I believe, this is my personal belief, drinking alcohol is a personal decision. And it took an alcoholic and the first beer to teach me the way that I should drink and that I can drink, okay, alcohol. And the Bible sets before me examples of blessings and curses that I went over. The decision to drink alcohol is personal. It's between God and the person. I really believe that. I am not qualified on any level to tell a person if they should drink alcohol. That is not something I should do. I can watch for signs of danger with people within my family, my friends, and people I know. And if I start seeing them getting into problems with alcohol, I can tell them. And I had to tell a member of my family one time, and I think it led to him stopping drinking. So, but that is my belief. I don't have the ability to tell a person if they should drink or not. It's a very personal thing. I want to go over, in conclusion, just some things about what the Bible really says about alcohol. Let's turn to Genesis, the 14th chapter, because there's a spiritual side to alcohol, especially wine. Genesis 14, and we'll just read verses 16 through 20. And here Abram, later to be known as Abraham, he has gone out and defeated the enemies that have kidnapped his brother Lot. He says, so he brought back, in verse 16 of chapter 14, so he brought back all the goods and also brought back his brother Lot and his goods, as well as the women and the people. And the king of Sodom went out to meet him in the valley of Sheba, that is the king's valley, after his return from the defeat of Chedorlaomer, if I'm saying that right, and the kings who were with him. Then Melchizedek king of Salem, brought out bread and wine. He was the priest of God Most High. And he blessed him and said, Blessed be Abram of the God Most High, possessor of heaven and earth, and blessed be the God Most High, who has delivered your enemies into your hand. Abram, as I said, he later became Abraham, had been in a war to free Lot from his captors, and brought a tithe of the spoils to Melchizedek, the king of Salem, later to be called Jerusalem. And Melchizedek was also the high priest of God. Now, Melchizedek brought out bread and wine, and I really believe this is a foretaste of the Messiah coming and giving his last meal with his disciples, because that's what they had, was bread and wine. Now, we know now that the bread was Christ's body, and the wine was a symbol of his blood that was spilled for us. God also said that wine is a blessing of the land. It's like a heritage. It's like an inheritance. And we can go to Genesis, the 27th chapter, just going over to Genesis 27, and we can read verse 28. And it says here on this blessing that was given, it said, Therefore may God give you of the dew of heaven, of the fatness of the earth, and plenty of grain and wine. Plenty of grain and wine were both considered a blessing from God. Now, there were people who had problems with alcohol abuse. Let's go to Hosea, the 4th chapter. If you don't want to turn there, you don't have to. It's just very short. It's the 11th verse. It says, Harlotry, wine, and new wine enslave the heart. Now, Old Testament wine was called, it's pronounced yayin, Y-A-Y-I-N, if I'm pronouncing it correctly. And new wine was called triash, or tirosh, T-I-R-O-S-H is the way it's pronounced. Both contain alcohol. Otherwise, it would not have taken the heart, as it said in Hosea 4:11. Some people say that the wine that Christ had in the New Testament, in the Greek it's called onos, O-I-N-O-S is the way it's pronounced, and that it was basically grape juice. Well, that can't be, because they had no refrigeration, and they probably had no pasteurization process. You know, when you take a grape and you look at that fuzzy stuff on it, that's yeast. If you mash up grapes with that fuzzy stuff on it, which they all have, that's a natural yeast, and it's going to make alcohol. Okay. So the fermentation process would have happened no matter what, and you would have had wine. So the difference between new wine and old wine was really both had alcohol. One probably tasted better. I would have gone for the older one. And then we know about the wine skins, and that's another thing about, I've heard people talk about the Bible not really, that Christ really didn't drink alcoholic wine. Well, yes, he did. But Matthew 9:17, there's a lot of different scriptures like this. You don't have to turn there if you don't want to. It says, Christ said, Nor do they put new wine into old wineskins, or else the wineskins break. The wine is spilled, and the wineskins are ruined. But they put new wine into new wineskins, and both are preserved. Now, Christ was speaking about his teachings, how it couldn't go into the older people's brains like the older Pharisees. It had to go into a new brain that could take his teachings and his ideas. But he's talking about the wine, the fermentation process would actually swell the bags. The newer wine holders that were made from skins would be more elastic, and they would stretch. The older ones wouldn't, so they would stretch and burst, and then you would lose all your wine. In Ephesians 5:18, you don't have to turn there, Paul said, be not drunk with wine, but at the same time he told Timothy, take a little wine for your stomach. So it wasn't that Paul was against wine. He didn't tell people not to drink wine. He actually told Timothy it's medicinal for you. Let's turn to what I really love about wine and the spiritual side. Let's turn to 1 Corinthians, the 11th chapter, and we'll start concluding here. The 11th chapter, in verse 21, where it says, "To our shame I say that we were too weak for that, but in whatever anyone is bold, I speak foolishly. I'm also," I think I got the wrong one here. I'm in 2 Corinthians. Wait just a minute. 1 Corinthians 11. And it'll make more sense then. 1 Corinthians 11th chapter. "For in eating, one takes his own supper ahead of others, and one is hungry, and another is drunk. What, do you not have houses to eat and drink in, or do you despise the church of God, and shame those who have nothing? What shall I say to you? Shall I praise you in this? I do not praise you. For I received from the Lord that which I delivered to you, that the Lord Jesus, on the same night in which he was betrayed, took bread, and when he had given thanks, he broke it and said, 'Take, eat, this is my body, which is broken for you. Do this in remembrance of me.' In the same manner he also took the cup after supper, saying, 'This cup is the new covenant in my blood. This do as often as you drink it in remembrance of me. For as often as you eat this bread and drink this cup, you proclaim the Lord's death till he comes.'" Now, the very wine and bread is important. We proclaim the Lord's death. We do that in this church. We take a little bit of wine, just a very small amount of wine, and we take a little bread, just a small amount. We're not here to solve our hunger or anything like that. To do so would be taking this right for kingdom people. It would be taking it unworthily. But let's turn on over to Mark, the 14th chapter, and very similar scriptures, and we'll read verses 22 through 25 in Mark 14. And it's very similar, but I want to make this one point here. So in Mark 14:22 it says, "And as they were eating, Jesus took bread, blessed and broke it, and gave it to them, and said, 'Take, eat, this is my body.' Then he took the cup, and when he had given thanks, he gave it to them, and they all drank from it. And he said, 'This is my blood of the new covenant, which is shed for many. Assuredly, I say to you, I will no longer drink of the fruit of the vine until that day that I drink it new in the kingdom of God.'" So he said he would not drink wine until we were in his kingdom. And that would happen at the marriage supper of the Lamb. Let's turn to Revelation 19, and we'll close out with this thought. Verses 7 through 9. "Let us be glad and rejoice and give him glory. For the marriage supper of the Lamb has come, and his wife has made herself ready." And that's us. That's us in this room right now. Okay? "And to her it was granted to be arrayed in fine linen, clean and bright, and the fine linen is the righteous acts of the saints. And he said to me, 'Write, blessed are those who are called to the marriage supper of the Lamb.' And he said to me, 'These are the true sayings of God.'" Now, if Christ would make the best wine probably ever on this earth, for a wedding on this earth, think about what he might make for his bride. Okay? It's bound to be the best wine ever. And I cannot wait to taste it, to sample its subtleties and its flavors. And if you'll let me, I may write a poem about it. I don't know how good it'll be. But excellent may be too mild a word for the wine that we will enjoy at the wine supper, at the wedding of Christ and his church.